Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Malcolm Maestrel and I'm a Membership Services Coordinator with IAAP. Thank you for joining us for the next webinar of our 2024 Professional Education Webinar Series, Digital Accessibility. We're very excited to continue the series with today's webinar, Project Manager / Product Owner, Crucial Roles in an Accessibility Program. But before we begin, we have a few general housekeeping items to go over. Closed captioning is provided. To enable closed captioning, select the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The stream text links for English, French, German, Spanish, and Swedish will be posted in the chat as well. An American Sign Language interpretation is also provided. Microphones are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions, and we ask that all attendees please post your questions in the Q&A. Questions will be saved until the end of the presentation. The chat will be monitored for general dialogue and technical issues, and today's webinar will be recorded and available in our webinar archives, and we will send out a copy of the recording and presentation to everyone who registered. And now I would like to turn today's program over to our presenters, Jeff Adams and Michele Lucchini.
Thanks everyone and welcome to the webinar. Today we'll focus on project manager and product owners as crucial roles in digital accessibility. We are from UsableNet, Jeff and and let us introduce briefly ourselves. I am Michele and I am the Vice President for Products. I oversee all the product development and the main focus is making sure that our services and technology supports clients in a meaningful way in their accessibility program. I've been working at UsableNet for over 20 years and in the accessibility space for over 20 years. And beside my day-to-day work, I'm also Jeff's co-author of Content for Everyone, a book that we wrote to support creative entrepreneurs in producing accessible and usable web content. With that said, I turn to Jeff to introduce himself.
Thanks, Michele. And I'm Jeff. I'm the Vice President of Accessibility Operations at UsableNet. I've been here nearly 13 years now, and a couple of my responsibilities include working with our clients to help them understand how to integrate accessibility into their processes and create that sustainable accessibility program that is so crucial to be able to work with accessibility well. And I also lead our training program here. So very happy to be here today to talk about project managers and product owners. And with that, a little look at our agenda for today. So we'll start off looking at the project manager's role, and then we'll get into some of the drivers for web accessibility in terms of the project manager. We'll talk about the prioritization mechanisms that are available. We'll look at the two phases of accessibility maturity and how those are actually connected to the product manager or the product owner. We'll look at the mindset switch that's involved in that maturity, and then we'll wrap it up with some concluding thoughts and certainly leave room and time for Q&A as well. So let's get in and talk about the project manager's role in accessibility. But before we get to accessibility, let's look at some of their responsibilities. Project managers, product owners have a lot of involvement in the software development lifecycle, of course. They're very often owning the plan for the projects that are happening, the individual sprints that are happening, making sure that things are moving through the process correctly. They often own the prioritization or at least heavily influence the prioritization of what's in those individual sprints, how projects are laid out. It's also up to them to create awareness and set expectations. So they're often working with the stakeholders to let them know how projects are moving, what the timelines are, any potential issues or risks that's coming up there, and setting the expectation around those timelines as well, as especially around when a project is going to launch. They might identify the need for expert support. I mean, this could be key in accessibility areas where even if the team has a lot of knowledge, they may occasionally need that extra support from someone who is expert in the WCAG and expert in web accessibility. Project managers often are also, kind of overseeing the QA process, understanding what's going into the testing plan, the testing scripts, what's being done automated versus what's being done on a manual process. And they can help influence to make sure that things are taken care of in the testing process, including around accessibility. That often includes the validation for any third parties as well. Things like chatbots or review widgets or contact forms, cookie banners, things like that. All of that has to make sure that it's integrated into the site well. And it's the project manager or the product owner who probably has the responsibility to make sure that that's in the testing plans as well, and that it's meeting all of the proper things that the third party should be, especially around accessibility. And then project manager, product owners could have an array of other responsibilities that are kind of set by the organization with how their particular processes work. The project manager and product owner, though, can also have a lot of input into the accessibility challenges. And this is a place for them to really be able to skill up to help other people understand what's going on. Accessibility, of course, can be very difficult for stakeholders to understand why it's important, what's involved in it, the impacts of not having an accessible site, the impact on the customer, as well as the legal landscape for the organization. And depending on what kind of accessibility work's being done, it can be very difficult to perceive or to understand its importance. So the product owner may have to explain things like why proper color contrast is important and the impacts of not having that, or why why you can't use images of text. And if you are using images of text, the things you have to do around that to make sure all of the text is perceivable by everybody. So the project manager is in a great spot to be able to help the organization itself and the stakeholders understand what's there. The project manager will know well the amount of time that it takes to go through and be able to do the accessibility work, because they'll be working with the designers and the developers and the QA team to understand the level of effort to get all that done. They can also help the organization understand the training that's necessary, because they'll see how the work is going and make sure that people get the training they need so they're able to do the accessibility work in the most efficient way possible. And of course, they'll also understand, if there has to be a delay in any of the other work streams that are happening in order to get the accessibility work done, whether that's, making sure something is meeting the accessibility standards to be able to go out the first time, or maybe it's a new project that's going to have to get delayed because there are issues there that they can't really afford to put out into production until they're fixed. So this is really where the project manager and that product owner really become a nexus of accessibility. And with that, I will turn it over to Michele to talk about the drivers.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So as part of the baseline understanding for a project manager or a product owner, in order to understand the economy of accessibility within a life cycle, it is quite crucial understanding which are the main drivers for web accessibility. And the first one is the design in terms of user interface, so the look and feel of the page, and the user experience, so the interaction that the customer will have with the website. When it comes to the user interface, aspects related to accessibility that impact the design are the use of colors, which translates into making sure that the color is not the only way to identify an element or an action, guaranteeing a minimum contrast, or using the correct size for the elements. The accessibility guideline requires specific minimum sizes for the elements, in particular for the mobile experience, so the tappable area, but that also applies to desktop website requirements. In terms of user experience, aspects such as the reading order, the interaction of elements, and a meaningful user flow are key aspects and key drivers for accessibility. In order to emphasize the importance of the design within an accessibility program of a website, consider that 34% of the success criteria of the Web Content Accessibility Guideline define design requirements. The following driver is the code, and this is probably something that everyone expects. So the way our developers are implementing the website is a vehicle for a successful accessibility of the final experience. Making sure that at code level, so HTML and JavaScript, the elements are used correctly, the attributes are appropriate for the elements, there is a formal correctness of the code, of its syntax, and the interaction are defined in an appropriate way. An example of interaction is the focus indicator, so the way we are highlighting the element we are interacting with. Connected to the code is the way we are defining the style sheet, so driver for the look and feel that we have discussed before. So making sure we are using this style in a meaningful way. A classic example that we might want to do here is making sure that we are not using styles or aspects related to, let's say, semantic indicators, such as a title, only to convey a style to the page. But if we define something as a title, that's a structural information, that's a information related to the hierarchy of that content within the page. Very often we find websites where styles are or elements are used only to convey a style without considering the impact on the final user that maybe relies on that structural information. Should not surprise everyone that 37% of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines success criteria define development requirements. Last but not least is the impact that the content has on the overall accessibility program, and moreover on the overall accessibility of the final product, on the digital property, on the website. Very often we focus all on design and development, and we forget to focus on content. Content can be a vehicle for many aspects. Here we are just listing three in consideration of the time that we have available. But the page structures, the textual presentation of visual information, which translates into the alternative text for the images, for example, making sure that the content is clear to understand, and basically the content is written in a way that doesn't require unnecessary effort to be understood. Something that typically surprises our clients is seeing that almost 30% of the Web Content Accessibility Guideline criteria actually define content-only requirements. And this figure highlights the importance of the content, in particular because the content team, often based on the company process, has a lot of control into what is published on the website. And this means potentially a risk if the content team is not able or is not trained or doesn't have the correct competencies and doesn't write content that is accessible. Part of the project managers and product owners' job, obviously, is the prioritization. In accessibility, there isn't just one prioritization mechanism, and it's not always easy to understand what's the best way. Often, it's not just a matter of severity. One of the most popular prioritization mechanisms is define how severe an issue is. So the worse the issue is, the quickest it should be resolved. That is just one of the aspects that we need to consider in accessibility, in particular because every issue might have impact on other areas of the, let's say, environment that regulates and govern the life cycle of a website. Aspects that we need to consider are the business impact. Is the issue affecting a particular category of users or personas? So that might represents the prioritization itself. What's the legal exposure? Is the issue particularly impacting an area that is considered by the legal team like a big exposure to legal risks that might have another kind of prioritization if we compare it to other requirements? Another need that we might want to consider is the development pipeline. Let's imagine that we have an issue that might be an high severity, but on an area that we are redesigning or re-implementing, and in 2 weeks we'll be pushing live a new version. If the remediating that issue will take more than 2 weeks, does it make sense to focus on it? So, of course, I'm trivializing a little bit the prioritization strategy here, but just to give an idea that we cannot just go straight into considering only the severity in order to determine what's the backlog and what's the order we should remediate the issues with. Also, based on what you might have understood reading between the lines of the previous slides, is also not just one person decision. So the impacts that we discussed before are also directly connected to responsibilities that the stakeholders have on the website. So you might need to combine needs and priorities from the customer business in terms of compliance, marketing, in terms of the legal exposures, and you might need to work with the digital directors in order to combine their needs and define a pipeline that makes sense with everyone's requirement. One of the, let's say, typical characteristics of accessibility is that in particular when the team is not extremely expert in accessibility, is quite difficult to determine a level of effort to remediate an issue up front. Also, it could be difficult up front to understand and determine who is supposed to do what. Is this an issue that the development team has to resolve? Is this an issue that the design team has to resolve? Or is it an issue for the content team to resolve? And how long to take often is very complicated to determine. You might have many accessibility issues that can be resolved just with one line of code, so the classic fix one, fix all. Or there might be other instances where one single issue might require a complete refactor of an element. And this is very, very typical, very, very popular in accessibility. There are, though, some low-hanging fruits that we should consider. While there isn't a formula that fits with everyone, the accessibility and remediating for accessibility involves not just technical knowledges, but also understanding of the processes at multiple levels, processes that regulates the life cycle of a website. If you want to remediate for accessibility, for sure, you should start building a backlog that consider which are the issues that are part of the common areas of your website. Obviously, if an issue is present on every single page, fixing it will improve the accessibility of every single page. Consider the issue complexity. how complex will be for your team to remediate the issue. And this combines to the issue severity we have alluded to before. So how impactful the issue will be on the final user experience. Combining these two parameters might give you, at least in the initial period, a quick way to increment the accessibility level of your website in the shortest time possible. And you do that working on the issues that have the highest priority but are the easiest to remediate. The slide that is on the screen right now shows our severity and complexity concentration diagram. Is a bubble diagram showing the areas of the issues. The bubble is bigger depending on the number of issues, and it combines the severity, so impact on the final user experience, and complexity to remediate the issue. So in the example that we see on this screen, the biggest bubble is related to the high severity issues with easy complexity, which is 45 issues. It represents a quick tool to determine what's the first target for the team to remediate. It is also, potentially, usually, it is a guarantee to have enough progress during the initial phases of the accessibility remediation. In the following slides, we'll also discuss the importance of making progress when you approach an accessibility program. Making progress should be the first goal. Being 100% compliant with the guideline could be, if set at the first stage, a too ambitious goal. So making progress should be what we focus on. And we have seen many cases where an initial remediation with a lack of progress resulted into a general deprioritization of accessibility. In particular, because if stakeholders compare the investment that has been made on accessibility, consider maybe they purchase an audit, so engage a vendor for an audit, consider aspects like training the developers, training the design team, training the content team, revisiting all the timelines to create space for the accessibility remediation. And that does not result into an increment of the conformance level that might obviously represent a big jeopardy of the entire accessibility program. So also, the progress is a big vehicle to inform the plans. And the more progress we do, the more we might want to change the plans. This is another characteristic of accessibility that involves, in particular, the project managers and product owner. Requires a flexibility into redefining the plans. While the team works on remediating for accessibility, they will gather more experience. So in the future, in the nearest future, you might see level of effort that are going to change. You might find a situation where one fix many issues, and you might have not known that when you start working on it. Or you might have unexpected level of effort, both directions. So issues that were estimated like taking a long time, that actually the solution was very quick in terms of time. Other issues that could take a way longer than what has been estimated. In order to monitor the progress and report progress to your stakeholder, that is a fundamental function of the project manager, you need to rely on tools. Together with the concentration diagram we have presented before, this is another screen that is part of the technology that we have implemented to support the audit process, but also the monitoring of the accessibility progress, and shows the progress over time on the remediation of a website. So thanks to these reports, it is easy to see what has been the trend on specific success criteria, or on specific pages of the website, or on the overall conformance of the website. With that said, I'll let Jeff go through the two phases of accessibility maturity.
Yeah. Thanks, Michele. So moving into the maturity aspects of accessibility, and really where the project manager plays a part in that. So usually when people are starting out in accessibility, either because they've identified the need internally that they need to provide that for their customers as they should be, or because they've actually, received some kind of a legal claim that has spurred them into action. Usually accessibility is starting as a project, which means it's absolutely sitting with the project manager to dig in there and to start to plan the work to be done. And that often starts with, of course, reviewing the audit report to understand what's in there, looking at the prioritization factors that Michele mentioned just a moment ago to be able to set some of those plans, identify the actions that are going to have to be made, and really digging in and planning the remediation. What needs to be done by design, what needs to be done by the content team, what needs to be done by developers, and through what timeline and across how many sprints, for example, is that work going to take. And of course, all of that involves rounds of development, rounds of validation, and QA tests to make sure that the work is done correctly and to correct anything that's in the audit. And then, of course, deploying those things out to production so that they're available to the customers to use and improving the website. What you want to do as you're in the accessibility as a project phase is really start to look towards phase 2, where you're starting to look at the ways that you're working, understanding the work that now needs to be done around accessibility, and starting to include that as part of your overall software development lifecycle, and starting to make this as a requirement for accessibility rather than maybe something that's more of a nice to have, or even something that's just left off the project plans entirely. And this is really where both project managers and product owners can play a crucial role to make sure that this gets instilled in the organization. So you're looking at things like, making sure that everything the design team does is accessible design, whether it's an internal team or a team who's working for an outside vendor or agency. You're going to want to make sure that the development satisfies the WCAG success criteria, so that you're ticking all of those boxes to make sure that it's actually accurate to the requirements. You want to make sure that the content team is fully trained and able to create accessible content for the website, for emails, for social media content. You want to make sure that QA is including accessibility analysis and testing when they're doing their work. They should be integrating screen readers into that. They should be integrating keyboard navigation into that, and other things to make sure that they're validating against the WCAG requirements. You want to expand the testing program so that you're involving members of the disabled community at each step of the way to make sure that what you're putting out there on production is accessible for all of the groups who need to access the content. And of course, your release plans need to consider accessibility metrics. What scores are you getting from automated testing? What has been done in terms of the manual testing that the QA team is doing? Are there any high severity issues there that would actually be blockers for members of the disabled community to be able to interact with the content and the site once it comes out? And what this turns into is that accessibility becomes part of your definition of done at each phase of the software development lifecycle, to make sure that it's not something that's all left to the end, and it puts the organization in the driver's seat of being much more proactive rather than reactive. And this all comes down to a mindset switch, where you are now thinking about accessibility at each step of the way. And we've seen firsthand how project managers and product owners can play a central role in this. One of the organizations that Michele and I work closely with is an airline. And they struggled for years being able to integrate accessibility into all of their different departments, all their different processes, they're set up in a way that even their homepage, for example, can have a dozen teams responsible for different parts of that page. And each of those teams had slightly different processes to work on. But as we continued to work and the project managers and product owners started to get involved, they started to understand the impacts to their customers. They started to understand the impacts to the business overall. And they started to make sure that all of the teams, regardless of where they worked, started to take accessibility into account. And we saw over the course of about a year to 18 months that they were starting to do, so much better in being proactive on accessibility and being able to action things in the way that, the maturity of their processes took a big jump in about those 18 months. And they just keep now working in this kind of new and improved way where the project managers and product owners are really leading some of that. Because at the end of the day, all of this just isn't about code or content or design fixes. It really is about the process. You've got to get everybody moving in lockstep. And again, this is where the project manager who pulls all these elements together could really be helpful, because you also want to make sure you're keeping an eye on not having any regression that's happening. Michele mentioned in some of his material a moment ago that if things start to go wrong, then it's easy to deprioritize it. And that's why it's important to keep track of how things move forward and if anything's regressing, because at that point you really need to understand why a mistake is being reintroduced somewhere along the way. And kind of connected to that is really always focusing on the root of the issue that's being done, not just fixing something on a single page with a button, but if a button is implemented across a number of areas where, say, like a newsletter sign up form is located or something like that, get to the root of that issue, fix it at the very source cause. This is especially true if you're working with a design system, so that you're not reintroducing it and that it just goes out and it's one of those instances where, one fix solves many things. And then it really all comes down to training, having a consistent training program in place, identifying programs that are good for the individual departments and teams to take, and some things that might be good for everybody to take to ensure that everybody's on the same page with accessibility. And then it comes into some of those changes that you'll make on the structural level. So for design system, for instance, where you're making those individual changes so every time the component is pulled, it's working well. And then other changes may happen at the back end level as well, to again make sure that everything is moving through the systems appropriately and to help you make sure that you're not reintroducing errors after you fix them. And this is all about changing the perception of the accessibilities that you have. When you're first starting out, you likely don't know. It's one of those situations, you don't know what you don't know. You didn't know what accessibility took. You didn't know what kind of issues you were going to get. And then over time, as you go through that first audit and you really start to move things so that you're being more proactive and mature in your program, you get into a situation where you've got bugs. You know how to fix them. Sites always have bugs. We can't expect a site to be 100% never going to have an accessibility bug after we remediate something. But like everything else, bugs go into the queue, bugs we know how to fix, and we take care of them. And this is why during remediation, it is, again, crucial to come back and focus on preventing regression. And that's why it's important to have everybody on board. And here's another area where the project manager can help. If you've got people siloed doing the remediation, and then somebody else comes in and does some other kind of maintenance, they could easily bring something back that had been fixed before. And that's why combining the resolution with root cause analysis is good, so that you can determine how things are fixed, make sure you're documenting those things so that you don't come back to them again. And it's really where the training again comes in, as does making sure you're refining your processes as you understand how things need to work in the organization with accessibility, that you're continuing to refine. And you're using technologies like the Aqua platform, other platforms that are out there that can help you build a hub for accessibility. So you've got all of your information, all of your tests in one centralized location. The idea is that you get to a place where these things aren't intimidating. Just like I mentioned, you've got other bugs that occur. Accessibility issues are going to be introduced. That's just the way it is. Like any bug is introduced. And as you get more into this mature space, they're not intimidating. Everybody knows how to deal with them. They get programmed into the processes to get fixed through maintenance. And ideally, you're creating less over time because, like other aspects of things that you learn, maybe around how to code correctly for privacy, code correctly for data security, you're coding correctly and designing correctly for accessibility as well. The whole idea here, of course, is in fact to shift left. You want to bring accessibility as early as absolutely possible into your processes, which is really where it comes down to, that being a big maturity of an organization. You want to set the accessibility requirements for each specific phase, for design, for content creation, for development, for testing. And that's going to be new inputs into the process, whereas before you might not have anything explicitly stated about those. They become explicitly stated so that everyone can be held accountable to them. And so the project manager can actually track that information and make it part of their reporting out to other parts of the organization. And of course, the experience gathered in remediation and the work that you're doing informs how to do it. It informs the skills that need to be developed. It informs the knowledge you might need to gather. It informs how you might need to notify everybody on a team about something. And it will continue to highlight areas where your processes might need to be modified as well. Because like every other aspect of process, there's always ways to continue to optimize the accessibility process as you learn more about it, which again is key for the project manager since they kind of sit at the hub of everything. And with that, I will send it back to Michele to wrap us up and head us into Q&A.
Thank you, Jeff. In terms of conclusion, let's see a summary of what we have seen. We like to think about the project manager or the owner as an accessibility cheerleader. So somebody that doesn't underestimate the importance of celebrating for progress made on accessibility. In particular, in a context where a company is exploring the best way to create an accessibility program. Like we said before, it is a fact that celebrating the progress and demonstrating the progress is one of the best vehicles to keep the accessibility program being fueled and going. So responsibility are, of course, related to communicating progress and the impact of the remediation that has been done. Also, what we have seen highlights the importance of developing an accessibility culture throughout the organization. So the product owner and the project managers are the responsible for making sure that everyone understands what they are talking about. Preventing the scenarios where you have teams that believe that accessibility can be completely automatized and you can have automated engines that are evaluating and maybe remediating for accessibility. Understanding the importance when it comes to the stakeholder communication, that is not just communicating numbers in terms of how many issues we have resolved, but also the impact on how much time has been invested together with which are the improvements in terms of user experience, in terms of legal exposures, all the parameters that we have seen before that might be related to point of views in accessibility. Another aspect that we like to sensitize people is that accessibility speaks many languages. The way you talk about accessibility to a developer is completely different than the way you should talk about accessibility to a stakeholder. So also gathering tools and technologies inside your organization that allows you to produce reports based on the audience is an important factor. So something that will allow you to use the right language, let's say, to communicate progress, what needs to be done, the impact of the changes, or the impact of not remediating some issues. In UsableNet, one of the biggest investments we did in the recent past was indeed on making sure that our technology was able to produce reports based on the different needs and create the correct visibility throughout the organization. Jeff, do you want to talk about the next one?
And this is really our concluding point here, is that, the overall goal is to form a sustainable accessibility program to maintain accessible digital properties. This is good for your customers, but it's also good for the organization that it becomes sustainable in this way, because it's going to help, make it so it can't, as a program, that it can't be deprioritized and regressing in its efforts. Because if you stop working on accessibility, it can very easily slide backwards. And again, this is a place where the PM is in that key position to be able to keep that from happening, to drive forward, in helping to set up this program and make sure that it's maintained in the proper way so that the organization is successful with it. And with that, we are happy to take questions. We've also got our email on the screen. We're happy to hear from you if need be. Michele is at Michele@usablenet.com, and I'm Jeff.Adams@usablenet.com.
Thank you very much, Jeff and Michele. This Malcolm, I've gone ahead and posted your emails and LinkedIn's from the slide in the chat as well. And I want to thank you both for such a great presentation. It was, I think, very valuable getting that product owner, product manager perspective. A lot of the times we're talking from the kind of development team side or the kind of overarching organizational side of things. So it was great to have this different perspective. And I want to remind all attendees to please post your questions in the Q&A in Zoom. And starting off, we have, what are the differences between the roles of product owner and a product manager? How do these differences impact the accessibility responsibilities of these roles?
I think what we've seen is that it really varies between organizations. And in some cases, you can find product owners who do the project manager function. If I was to think about defining them discreetly, I think the product owner is probably the key stakeholder on a given product. If you think about an e-commerce website, for example, they could be the one who actually owns the process going, to find the product and get it all the way through checkout, and they own all the elements that are in there. And it's possible that they might just be owning the strategy part of that, helping to set the priorities, but they may also have the responsibility of the project manager, where they're actually starting to, get into the mix of the process and, help organize the user stories for a given sprint, for a given quarter, for a given year, and be the one who's driving those projects forward. I think, with the airline example that I mentioned, in that case, they're product owners and have the project management function kind of built into them. But we certainly see organizations too where they're a little more separated out.
Thank you, Jeff. And to add on what you were saying at the end, there was another question about how do you get buy-in at that phase? And that question came in when you were talking about working with the airline and integrating accessibility into their different departments and the different processes for those departments. And that it really kind of started after the product manager / product owner got involved. So could you please expand on how you got buy-in at that phase?
I'd like to defer that one to Michele, because he has worked more long-term with that, and he's got slightly more insight there than I do.
Yeah, in that specific case, there was a strong requirement coming from the top of the organization. But like Jeff said in our story, despite that strong requirement, the progress wasn't good because we were relying on the single teams, developers, designer, content team. And they were organized in multiple different agencies. So there were vendors, and they were also changing frequently. So what we did, the intuition we had was to do a workshop with the product owners, making accessibility very personal. So we did a workshop on how to use a screen reader. So we focus specifically on the visual disabilities, and after that on motor disabilities, so trying to interact with their site just with the keyboard. And you could see that made the thing, that created the urgency, because that became personal. So scenario like, I'm the product owner for the main carousel on the home page, and I'm realizing now that a blind user cannot navigate my carousel, cannot swipe through these slides, or the screen reader is not announcing correctly the content of the carousel slide. So making that personal created a lot of engagement and empowerment from the product owner team. But obviously, the mandate that came from the top, so that site needs to be accessible, was a crucial driver, of course. Jeff, anything you would like to add?
That use case, had its interesting portion in that there was already, the mandate from the top of the organization, and it was a matter of getting it worked down below that. But of course, for individuals who might be in organizations where they're trying to build the support, that's a whole webinar in itself, actually, on how to do that. But it really, you've got to take the information that you've got about, the accessibility of the site as you understand it, and then start to build the case about, the impacts to the customer base if accessibility isn't, brought in-house and starting to be worked on. You can rely on the legal aspect of it too, but I think it's much more powerful to be able to say, if we don't do these things, then we're going to have a percentage of our customers and potential customers who aren't going to be able to interact with us. And can we really afford to let that happen? And then you just have to start, building essentially from the grassroots level to try to get it to where somebody who's in the executive suite, pays attention and starts to set it as a prioritization for the organization. I've just made it sound super simple in those few sentences, but it can take an entire, not an insignificant effort to start to build that throughout an organization.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Michele. Our next question is, how can we leverage accessibility to convince stakeholders to prioritize these changes in process from a business perspective?
Yeah, maybe I can start.
Yeah.
And then if you can chime in. Consider that an approximation that is actually quite precise says that at least 20% of any website customer are affected by a form of disability. Consider also the spectrum of the users that are simply getting older, and maybe some function might be deteriorating over time. Consider additionally, the disabilities are actually induced by the context of use, like being a loud environment and the need of processing the content from a video that doesn't have the closed captioning. Consider not a great contrast experience under a deep light, like deep sunlight, and maybe the customer is not able to distinguish the user controls of the website very well. So there is definitely a business impact of accessibility. We don't need just to consider accessibility in terms of users with different abilities impacted by a much wider interpretation of it. Jeff, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I think you highlighted some really solid things there, because it kind of goes back to what I said a minute ago, where if you know of accessibility issues that exist on the site, one of my favorites to use is focus indicators and keyboard navigation, because so few sites, unless they're doing accessibility work, it's easy to get lost when you're keyboard navigating. And just if you tab through and show somebody, how you could easily lose track of where you are because the focus indicators aren't of good color contrast or aren't there at all, start to highlight some of the issues that anybody who needs to navigate by keyboard can have. And then you can kind of tie that back to the percentages that Michele was mentioning of, just how big the disabled community is, and especially, as you put, permanent disabilities alongside situational, episodic, and temporary. It's really an audience you can't afford not to serve, because if you're not doing it, then your competition probably is, or maybe is getting ahead of you on the accessibility work. So it's one of those things. It's like, why would you not do the best that you can to serve your customers well?
Thank you both. And then we have another question in the Q&A. Why do you think that accessibility has come in a bit late to the project/program/product management community? It seems so central to ensuring that work gets done, yet often gets overlooked.
I think that it has to do with the misconception that's been out there for decades now, really, that all of this falls onto development, and it's just something that they should be doing. It's only really in the last few years that really the spotlight's been on. It's an everybody thing, whether it's development, design, QA, content teams, and with product managers and product owners, or project managers rather, really sitting at the center of all that work. I think it has finally started to dawn on folks that they're the ones who can help push that work through, make sure it gets the visibility, because it factors so much into the work that they do overall to keep projects moving and to make sure all of the requirements are taken care of. So it would make sense for them to kind of integrate that into one of the requirements that they're tracking. Is there anything you would add to that, Michele?
Yeah, is also part of a cliche around accessibility. If you consider a point of view that somebody that is not an expert in accessibility, you find in the market a plethora of accessibility testing tools. So something that happens at the end of your implementation, at the end of your build. And there isn't many tools, probably there isn't any tool that tells you how to define accessibility requirements, how to implement accessibility. Those are the guidelines, which are sort of manuals on how to do things. But we got used to consider accessibility as a final check. Once everything is done, I validate my code with an accessibility scan. That's a cultural change that needs to happen, and we are putting our best effort to train our customers and educate them on the importance of transforming accessibility from a project into a requirement. The project can be the final test that an expert does in order to highlight all the violations of the guideline, but then beside the remediation that you will be doing based on those results, you also need to remediate your processes and your culture. So you are gathering the experience, fixing what you didn't know had to be implemented in a certain way. And you make that now a requirement for every new work, for every maintenance, for every content creation, every design, and so on and so forth.
Thank you both again. And in your presentation, you mentioned that it's accessibility as a process, it's a journey. And we have another question from someone who's currently in the very early stages of the accessibility journey. And they're asking if you would recommend having a dedicated team for accessibility with representatives from different departments.
We certainly recommend the formation of what we call a center of excellence. It could be called any number of things, but it starts to bring together people from those different, teams, whether it's design, development, content, legal, marketing. You could have all kinds of people in there to start to, establish the processes, establish the policy around it. I don't think accessibility should be siloed in the teams. For example, I wouldn't have just one person on the development team, working on accessibility, because then if they're not doing all that work, somebody else can go and create accessibility issues. So, but having a team who is essentially that center of expertise in the organization, who knows the goals of the organization, who knows, who can help kind of guide them, whether it's getting them information that they need or understanding the guidelines or connecting them with, an accessibility expert that the organization may be working with. Having that team who can help set the process and set those policies is so crucial, because then that team could also help elevate the visibility of accessibility within the organization. And ideally, that team would also have an executive sponsoring that team who kind of says, these things are important. We need to do this accessibility work, and this is the team who's going to help us set our processes and keep us moving in the proper direction.
Yeah, maybe if I can just add one thing. Don't underestimate the importance of finding a partner that is not just good in auditing your digital properties, but is also able to audit your processes, audit the way you work, in order to recommend which are the most significant changes that you have to operate on your ways of working in order to accommodate accessibility as a requirement. The Center of Excellence can be an extremely solid and robust way to promote accessibility, monitor that the processes are applied, monitor the adoption of tools, for example. But obviously it needs to be created in a way that is coherent with the environment, with the ecosystem that it should be part of.
Thank you. And we're getting to the top of the hour, but I think we have time for one more question. So project managers are also in tight communication with the client. What roles should PMs play in engaging the client in accessibility? If the client prioritizes accessibility, it will have a huge impact on their priorities, yet often this is overlooked. Internal teams are different than vendor/client relations.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I can start, and maybe Jeff, you can add color. Yeah, I mean, first of all, the client might dictate a generic requirement. We need the website that, and I assume that maybe who asked the question needs to be, or is a project manager related to a site or a website that they are building for a client. So the client might come to the table saying the site needs to be ADA compliant. So obviously you will need to report in terms of the adherence of the website to the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, maybe being able to explain what has been done in order to confirm that the final product is in line with the expectation. But that's not the only thing, actually, because you might need to train your client in case, for example, the client is populating the site with content. So it's not just handing off a website that is accessible, That website will change, will evolve, maybe under the changes that you will apply or the changes that the client will apply. So I think as part of the overall product management is also important to consider the aspect that the client will need to be trained in order to remove any jeopardy of breaking the accessibility of the website. Jeff, anything I missed?
I mean, what I would add there kind of goes to the idea. I think what Michele mentioned is where the client already understands that they probably need accessibility as part of the build. I think the project manager certainly has a central role too, that if it's not in the requirements, to bring up, accessibility and to make sure that it does end up in the requirements, to make sure if something in the design, that they've approved, and if they're trying to push the design in a way that's not accessible, to really start to highlight those things so that you're at least doing your due diligence in the project to make sure that it's accessible, and that if the client for some reason is pushing you in a direction where it's not, that's getting documented as well, so that there's not, something that comes up later of, well, why didn't you tell me that? It's like, well, we did tell you that. Because I think we all have a role to play in terms of getting things accessible. And I think that's a central role that a project manager can play in that kind of client-vendor relationship.
Once again, I want to thank you, Jeff and Michele. It was such a great presentation, and it's always lovely seeing so many questions in the Q&A. I also want to thank our ASL interpreters, Lizzie and Lindsay, and our captioner, Kelly, for their lovely work as always. And then for upcoming IAAP webinars, tomorrow we have a subject matter expert webinar, IAAP and Teach Access present what everyone should know about digital accessibility with Sarah Horton and David Sloan. And then coming up in September on the 19th, we have our next Built Environment Series webinar, Meaningful Accessibility in Built Environments. And then on September 24th, we have our IAAP EU event celebrating the Web Accessibility Directive 4th anniversary. And for those who are not yet an IAAP member, we welcome you to join our network of over 6,500 accessibility professionals in over 100 countries. All IAAP members get complimentary access to live professional education webinars, as well as our library of archived webinars, access to our Connections networking platform, free courses, and more. And anyone who's interested can sign up at accessibilityassociation.org or email info@accessibilityassociation.org to see how you can become an IAAP member today. Once again, thank you to Jeff and Michele, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.